Welcome back to Live Now from Fox. 7:11 is the time, and right now we're following breaking news as it relates to conflict in the Middle East. Truly compelling video on your screen of recent airstrikes there in Beirut, Lebanon. We're learning early this Monday morning, the Israeli ambassador to Washington, he says that a ceasefire deal to end fighting between Israel and the Lebanon-based Hezbollah could be reached, quote, within days, end quote. Ambassador Mike Herzog told Israeli Army Radio this Monday that there remained points to finalize and that any deal required agreement from the government. But he said, quote, we are close to a deal and that it can happen within days, end quote. Among the issues that remain is an Israeli demand to reserve the right to act should Hezbollah violate its obligations under the emerging deal. The deal seeks to push Hezbollah and Israeli troops out of southern Lebanon. Joining us live this morning to further discuss this breaking news alert is Dr. Asaf Romirowsky. He's the Executive Director of Scholars for Peace in the Middle East. Dr. Asaf, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So, Dr. Asaf, a lot to dissect. Good news for those that were hoping for a ceasefire deal, as it seems some leeway is being made. But there are concerns this morning. What happens after that ceasefire is reached, if it is reached? And then, of course, how do you expect Hezbollah to uphold their end of the bargain?
All true. So let's try to contextualize where we are and what actually are the three basic issues of the proposed ceasefire. One, of course, has to do with the removal or pushing Hezbollah north of the Litani River. Secondly, has to do with the fact that Israel would remove its troops. And third has to do with the demarcation of the area. Above all, also has to do with the pressure, I guess, or as far as the push and pull as far as power goes, that the Lebanese army would actually take over for the areas of Hezbollah, and that will allow Israel to deal with the Lebanese army. The problem with that, of course, has to do with the fact that Hezbollah really is the true force and the true force politically and militarily in Lebanon. How much power the actual Lebanese army can actually do is yet to be seen. And the other consideration has to do with the fact that there was mention that some kind of international force would be in the region in order to kind of mediate between the two parties. UNIFIL, as we know, has been ineffective to say the least. They have been complacent with Hezbollah. And that being said, it's going to be hard for the Israelis to trust UNIFIL as far as the force in that area, given how in bed they've been with Hezbollah. Above all, the challenge is, to your last point, is if Hezbollah indeed violates this, what it will take for the Israeli army to go back into Lebanon. And even as the deal was being discussed yesterday, we saw 250 rockets hitting a barrage of Israel itself. And again, that was to be expected. Hezbollah is still trying to show the upper hand and to show that they are still in control. They still have stockpiles of munitions, and they are still a valuable threat. All of those are part of the consideration, and all of this really depends on, do you trust the parties on the ground? Above all, let's not forget that there are close to between 60 to 70,000 Israeli citizens who have been displaced for months now since the war began in the north. Israel has obviously an incentive to bring them back home, back to normal life. The entire area of the north has been devastated economically by the entire situation. So this is kind of the push and pull that you're facing here. But without establishing clear guides of security and safety, it's going to be hard to move it along. But that's what's really on the table that we know at this point.
Yeah, so many great points you're raising, Dr. Asaf. I want to get back to what you were saying about the recent strikes against Israel. We saw it in real time Sunday, which was yesterday. Central Israel, we saw homes that were completely just destroyed. We saw cars and vehicles that were set on fire because of these airstrikes. And that's the concern. How can we even think that a ceasefire is imminent as the war between the two entities is not scaling back? It's kind of convoluted.
It's 100% correct to your point. I mean, look, I think that Amos Hochstein, the Middle East, the representative of the United States to the area of Lebanon, there is a push, obviously, by the administration to come to some kind of ceasefire before January 20th, before the inauguration. There is a push to try to create as much of a clean slate or a relatively calm area before the transition of powers. Again, politics and again, the agenda of the United States and the timeline of Israel may not necessarily align and go hand in hand. And that's been the challenge since the beginning of the war, that we're now a year plus into all of this, as Israel has been fighting this multi-front war against Iran and these closer fronts as it relates to the north and the south when it comes to fighting Hamas and Hezbollah. So all of these are part of the challenges. It is said, and this is what was reported, that we know from what was leaked to the Israeli media and from what was being said to Hochstein, that there is an agreement that they will respond to it. Hezbollah responded to the deal itself. That being said, it's going to be really hard to see actually Hezbollah follow through. And that's the hardest part that Israel is, of course, concerned about, the security issues at large here. That being said, I think that there will be coming pressure from the United States on the Israelis, and whether or not the Trump campaign, the kind of the transitional team is going to put pressure on the Israelis to try to reset whatever they can before January, in tandem with what's coming out with the Biden administration. That's the push and pull and some of the diplomatic pressure that's going to come on the Israelis. But again, all bets are, it's hard to predict. And if Hezbollah decides to, decide that, we're not going to follow through on this, you'll see an acceleration, which goes back to your early point about the fact that if Israel does not feel safe with this deal, they will retaliate. And I think at this point we are very clear that the Israelis are not going to hold back in any way, shape, or form, given where we are with the overall war at large.
Yeah, I want to get to another point you raised that was a great talking point, Dr. Asaf. We have innocent people who are displaced on both sides of this conflict. Innocent people in Israel, also innocent people in Lebanon. We saw in real time those evacuation orders that came down from Israeli Defense Forces before they started their ground invasion there in Beirut. What is this post-war plan as it relates to this conflict? We know there's been a lot of pressure on Netanyahu about a post-war plan as far as the conflict out in Gaza with Hamas. But what about the people in Lebanon that have nothing to do with Hezbollah, that are also displaced? Also, those people within his own country, Israel. We know there was a looming humanitarian crisis before October 7th even started, and then further after, as Hezbollah ramped up their conflict. A lot of people concerned about getting basic necessities such as food, water, and shelter.
100%. Let's also not forget the fact that, like in the South, where Hamas has hijacked Gaza and basically took over Gaza at large, Hezbollah, as I was alluding to before, is a dominant force in Lebanon. Everything is basically run, within through Hezbollah. Hezbollah is considered to be the most dominant force, even within the Lebanese parliament, and so a de-Hezbollification of Lebanon has been required for a very long time. And this is all impacting the larger arena inside of Lebanon. Obviously, the difference between the arenas are that, of course, Lebanon is a full-fledged state, albeit, kind of a failed state in the situation that it's been running, given the fact of how Hezbollah has been running the show and been used as its own playground, and of course controlled and financed by the Islamic Republic of Iran. There is a great deal of need, and I'm sure that part of the package deal that it's going to be on the table is going to be part of the reconstruction of Lebanon, bringing in more aid, other international groups. As I was saying before, the idea that there would be some kind of international force that would help mediate the situation in Lebanon militarily, that is not Hezbollah, and to help the weak Lebanese government try to deal with the environment itself, in addition to coming to deal with aid, and again, constituting some kind of rehabilitation plan, for lack of a better term, when it comes to Beirut and the areas that have been affected by the war itself. That's all going to take time, and it's going to be part of the carrots that are going to be put on the table potentially, and I would argue from the United States, as far as money and forces and aid that's coming in to try to deal with that environment, if they can really establish clear lines of the red lines as far as clear lines of defense for both the civilian population inside of Lebanon and, of course, the civilian population inside of Israel, as I was saying before, that has still been evacuated and has not been able to go home for over a year now.
And as we further discuss this conflict in the Middle East, we know a lot of eyes are going to be on Italy this week for that G7 summit. Do you expect talks to be underway as it relates to Middle East conflicts and maybe even Ukraine as well, Dr. Asaf?
I'm sure it's going to come up again and again. I think the big concern with the Europeans is the latest fallacious decision made by the International Court of Justice that is basically a kangaroo court that is threatening to put warrants and send to arrest Benjamin Netanyahu and former Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. I think that that's all going to be part of the pressure coming down as the parties are there, to marginalize and to put aside all that kind of mockery and grotesque decisions. To my mind, it's similar to kind of the terrorism victory flag led by the International Court of Justice to make sure that Europe is indeed following suit with us as far as the United States supporting Israel, while at the same time trying to create peace and calm in the region and the Middle East at large, because this war has been a multi-front war and all the tentacles that have impacted stability and safety in the region at large. But above all, because it's the G7 summit, really the consequences, the economic consequences to Iran's quest for the bomb. And is there going to be enough support from European allies to understand what is actually happening on the ground and to garner support in this lame duck period by the White House if they can actually get European support? Again, part of trying to set up the next administration for success is yet to be seen, but that will be on the table for sure.
Dr. Asaf, always a pleasure to have these candid and thorough conversations with you, as we know this is a looming situation there in the Middle East. Thank you so much for joining us bright and early this Monday. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you as always.